Today, we're tackling one of history's absolute biggest construction projects, the Great Pyramid of Giza. We're going to peel back 4,500 years of mystery to see the brilliant, and I mean brilliant, engineering that made it all possible.
So this is the question, isn't it? The one that stumped historians and engineers for centuries. I mean, just think about it. No modern tools, no cranes, no lasers. So how on earth did they build something so massive, so precise, that it's still standing today? It's kind of mind-boggling. Let's start by just trying to wrap our heads around the sheer scale of the challenge. First up, just consider the weight. We're talking about a staggering 6 million tons. That's an amount of material that's almost impossible to even imagine moving and putting into place.
And that weight, it's spread out across something like 2.3 million individual stone blocks. Every single one of them had to be quarried, hauled, and then lifted into its perfect spot.
And all of this stone just keeps going up and up to a breathtaking height of 480 feet. For almost 4,000 years, this was the tallest man-made structure in the entire world. So how did they pull it off? To really get what a challenge this was, we've got to put this scale into words we can actually understand. You know, it's one thing to hear the numbers, but it's something else entirely to really feel how big that is. Let's start with its footprint. The base of the pyramid covers a massive 13 acres. Okay, what does that mean? It means you could cram 9, that's right, 9, entire professional football fields inside the base and still have room to spare. That's the foundation they were working with.
And what about that 6 million ton figure? Well, let's compare it to the tallest building in the world today, the Burj Khalifa. That thing weighs about 500,000 tons. So, the Great Pyramid weighs as much as 12 Burj Khalifas. 12! It's just an absolutely monumental achievement.
Now, any building that big is going to crumble without a perfect foundation. So the very first problems the ancient Egyptians had to solve were creating a base that was perfectly level and perfectly aligned. First, let's talk alignment. The sides of the Great Pyramid face true north, south, east, and west with almost flawless accuracy. But how could they possibly do that thousands of years before anyone had even invented a magnetic compass? Well, the answer wasn't on the ground. It was in the night sky. By watching the pole stars, the ones that mark the true north and south poles in the sky, the ancient architects could figure out a perfect east-west line. It's a simple but absolutely brilliant trick, using astronomy that gave them an alignment with pretty much zero error. Okay, so the pyramid is aligned. But what about making that giant 13-acre base perfectly flat? Even a tiny mistake in the level at the bottom will become a huge problem by the time you get to the top. So, with no lasers, how'd they do it? Their solution was just genius and so simple. They used water. First, engineers dug a whole network of trenches all around the edge of the base. Then, they just filled them with water. And since water always finds its own perfect level, that gave them an exact reference line across the entire site. All they had to do then was chisel the bedrock down until it touched that water line. Incredible. So, the foundation is set. Now it's time to bring in the building blocks. And this was maybe an even bigger logistical nightmare, because the stones weren't exactly just lying around nearby. Most of the pyramid is made of limestone, but they didn't get it from Giza. The main quarry for all the best blocks was in a city called Tura, which was a mind-boggling 250 kilometers away. And we're not talking about small pebbles here. A lot of these blocks weighed up to 50 tons apiece. To give you some perspective, a single 50-ton block weighs about the same as 3 city buses. Now imagine you have to move hundreds of thousands of them. To move that much weight over that kind of distance, they used nature's own superhighway, the Nile River. They loaded the massive blocks onto huge boats. Experts figure it took an army of at least 500 workers just to load and unload a single one of these giant stones for its long trip to Giza. All right, the stones have made it to the site. Now we get to the most famous puzzle of them all. How in the world do you lift 50-ton blocks, one after another, to build a 480-foot-tall mountain of stone? Now, nobody knows the exact method for sure, but the big theories all point to massive ramps. One idea is a long, spiral ramp that would have corkscrewed up and around the outside of the pyramid as it got taller. Another is a series of zigzagging ramps built straight up one of the faces. Either way, it would have taken armies of workers in a slow, brutal process, dragging these giant stones up enormous man-made hills. But maybe the greatest engineering secret wasn't on the outside of the pyramid at all. It was hidden deep inside its chambers. And in there, the builders were working with a material that should have been totally impossible for them to cut. You see, the inner rooms, like the king's chamber, weren't made of limestone. They were built with granite. And granite is one of the hardest natural stones on the planet, right behind diamond. It's so tough that it's actually hard to cut even with today's steel tools.
So this was a huge mystery. The ancient Egyptians mostly had tools made of copper, which is a really soft metal. How could they possibly cut and shape these massive blocks of super hard granite so perfectly using only soft copper saws?
The solution they came up with was completely counterintuitive and totally brilliant. Instead of a sharper tool, they used a toothless saw. Yeah, you heard me. Researchers think they'd place a simple copper saw on the granite block. Then, as two workers just slid it back and forth, a third person would pour abrasive sand and gravel into the cut. So it wasn't the soft copper doing the cutting at all. It was the hard sand literally grinding its way through the granite. Painfully slow, I'm sure, but incredibly effective. Just think about all the incredible problem-solving we've just walked through. They aligned this massive structure using the stars. They leveled a 13-acre base using nothing but water. They moved millions of tons of stone on the river, lifted it with giant ramps, and cut one of the hardest stones on Earth using just sand.
Every single solution we've talked about was a masterpiece of engineering, and yet the pyramids are still holding on to their secrets. Not too long ago, researchers sent a tiny robot deep into a shaft that had never been explored. It drilled through a stone slab, and on the other side, its camera saw something that no human had seen 4,500 years. What was it? Well, that's a story for another time.